On my wedding day, my fiancé lost a game and had to feed alcohol to his childhood friend, mouth to mouth. In response, I turned and kissed the best man, leaving everyone at the ceremony in shock. Mason and I had been in love for 8 years and were finally celebrating our wedding on National Day. I was dressed in a radiant gown, waiting patiently in the room for him to arrive. After waiting a long time without seeing anyone, I heard a burst of applause from outside. I looked and saw my fiancé, Mason, with his friend Claire. They had lost a game, and now had to fulfill a penalty. Without any rush, Mason took a glass from the table, filled his mouth with wine, and kissed Claire's lips. Their lips and tongues touched, making a sound as the wine soaked their necks. About 10 seconds passed before they pulled apart. Claire's face was flushed, her lips red and swollen. Everyone in the room turned to look at me with mocking, pitying, and maliciously satisfied expressions. Claire's hand stayed on Mason's waist as she stared at me, refusing to let go, without showing the slightest remorse, and even with a hint of provocation. She laughed and said, "I was just helping you try out the wedding game, don't get mad." I wanted to ask what kind of game involved giving alcohol mouth to mouth to someone else's fiancé at a wedding, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Surprisingly, I didn't feel angry. Instead, I experienced a strange sense of relief. But my best friend didn't feel the same. She rolled up her sleeves, ready to cause a scene. Mason stepped in front of Claire, looking at me sternly. "Audrey, if your friend touches Claire today, this wedding is off." I nodded, pulled my friend back, and gestured for them to continue with the game. Seeing my silence, Mason assumed I was upset. "Can you stop being so jealous? How many times do I have to tell you that Claire is like a sister to me?" His tone was filled with frustration. I gave a lazy smile and replied, "I'm not angry. Go on with the game. We'll be waiting in the room." With my calm response, he had nothing left to say and sat back down to continue playing truth or dare with his friends. Soon, Mason lost again and chose truth. Claire didn't miss the opportunity and, looking at him tenderly, asked, "If Audrey weren't here, would you marry me?" As she spoke, she pulled out a black bag, revealing stacks of $100 bills. "Here's $200,000. Consider it a gift, not a dowry." Mason froze momentarily at the unexpected scene but quickly regained his composure. Under the amazed stares of the crowd, he slowly nodded and said, "Yes, I would marry you." Everyone's eyes turned to me, stunned. I got up from the bed, hiding my entertained expression, and started clapping. "Congratulations to this couple for finally being together. May you have many children." I said it sincerely, but everyone assumed I was furious. Mason frowned, visibly irritated, and spoke up. "Audrey, how many times do I have to tell you, this is just a stupid game? Why are you saying these ridiculous things? Are you crazy? It's our wedding day. What do you mean by that? Are you trying to call off the wedding?" Hearing his accusations, I couldn't help but find it all amusing. Who exactly didn't want to get married here? He spoke again. "We're not even married yet, and you're already being controlling, jealous, and narrow-minded. We can't have fun with you around." Claire, with an arrogant smile, provocatively clung to Mason's arm. "Don't worry. Stay here, we'll call you when the game is over." On my wedding day, my fiancé left me outside, forcing me to watch him get intimate with another woman while the guests whispered among themselves, holding their gift envelopes. Just thinking about it made me feel pathetic and ridiculous, but to everyone else, it all seemed perfectly normal. No one was surprised by the flirting between Mason and Claire. In fact, they acted like my role as a fool and all this was natural. In the past, I would have flipped the table and shouted at everyone. It would have ended in a huge fight, with Mason insisting that he and Claire were just friends, and that I was the one with a dirty mind. He'd feel disappointed in me, saying I was ruining everything and didn't trust him. No matter what I said, he'd give me the silent treatment, maybe even meet up with Claire just to make me jealous, until I eventually begged him for forgiveness like a dog. Only then would he interrogate me, making me admit that I was irrational and needed to trust him unconditionally. Over the years, Thanks to his constant manipulation, I had become a crazy person who hung on his every word. Even on our wedding day, I still found myself instinctively wondering if I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew they were the ones in the wrong. The door closed, cutting off my view, and all I could hear was the sound of laughter and noise outside. I leaned against the window, watching the lively scene below. My friends were behind me, furious. "This is too much. If this wedding doesn't happen, who cares?" But any further words were quickly silenced when they saw my expression and decided not to continue. Everyone thought this wedding wasn't Mason's idea but something I had begged for. Not long ago, Mason had said he wanted to marry me, and I agreed, naively believing that after 8 years of waiting, I'd finally have my happy ending. But today's events were like a cold splash of water, waking me up to reality. My best friend, Sophie, who had spoken up for me earlier, was beyond frustrated. "He's humiliated you like this, and you still want to marry him?" I looked at her and replied, "Then I won't." As I spoke, I started removing the golden hairpins and jewelry. Sophie looked alarmed, and she quickly tried to stop me. "Are you crazy?" But what I did next really left everyone stunned. I looked at myself in the mirror, removing each golden hairpin that held my hair in place. With every clip that dropped onto the dresser, I felt as if I was shedding not only the weight of the hairstyle, but also years of humiliation and manipulation. Sophie stayed by my side, gripping my arm, looking at me as if I'd lost my mind. But for the first time in ages, my mind was crystal clear. "Audrey, you don't have to do this, not like this," she murmured, her voice filled with concern. I looked at her but said nothing. Inside, I felt a deep, unfamiliar calm. The anger that would have normally burst out was now contained, cold, calculated. I knew exactly what I had to do. There were no more tears to cry, no more fights to win. I was drained. 8 years of my life wasted, waiting for a future Mason never intended to give me. I released the last hairpin, letting my hair fall over my shoulders. Sophie watched me, visibly uneasy. "What are you going to do?" she asked anxiously. "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied, finally standing up from the chair. The moment I opened the bedroom door, I heard more laughter coming from the living room. Mason was there, sitting with Claire, laughing loudly while everyone encouraged him, completely carefree. To them, I was nothing more than an obstacle to their fun, a woman he once vowed to love, honor, and respect, now a mere footnote in his show. I walked down the hallway and entered the living room with a firm stride. The laughter died down as people began to look at me, not with concern or respect, but with pure curiosity. I was the main attraction in the circus Mason had created, and as the master manipulator he was ready to humiliate me publicly if I lost control. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Mason looked at me with a smug grin. Finally decided to join us? "I hope you've calmed down," he said, holding Claire's hand as if nothing was wrong. "I am calm," I replied in an eerily steady voice. "And I've made a decision." Mason raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, yeah? And what might that be?" "I'm not marrying you." The silence that followed was almost tangible. Every eye in the room locked on us as if they were witnessing the climax of a much-anticipated movie. Mason's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained it. "Don't be dramatic, Audrey. It's just a game, remember? You're overreacting." "No, Mason. The real mistake was believing that you loved me, thinking you could be a man worthy of respect. But the truth is, you never intended to be that man. And you know what? I'm done being the fool in this relationship." Claire tried to stifle a smirk but failed miserably, clearly pleased with herself, as if she'd won some competition. I looked her directly in the eyes, unblinking. "You can keep him, Claire. He's exactly your type, 2 selfish cowards who deserve each other." Claire's smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. Before she could respond, I turned to Mason. "And you? Good luck. I hope she treats you the same way you treated me all these years. Maybe when it's too late, you'll realize what you lost." Mason started to rise, but I raised my hand to stop him. "No. There's nothing left to discuss. The show's over for me. I turned to the guests, many of whom held envelopes stuffed with money, their eyes wide in shock. Oh, and those who brought gifts? Leave them with the happy couple. They need them more than I do. With that, I left the room, feeling their stunned gazes on me. Sophie ran after me, unable to hide the pride in her smile. I've never been prouder of you, she whispered, exhaling what felt like a sigh of relief rather than sadness. Me too, Sophie. Me too. We walked into the night together, and the fresh air wrapped around me like a liberating breeze. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. There were no more doubts or second-guessing about what I should have done or said. I was free. When I left that room, something inside me shifted. For years, I'd been nothing more than a puppet in Mason's hands, trapped in an endless cycle of empty promises and emotional manipulation. But now, I was free, and not just free to move on, but free to ensure he'd never forget the mistake of underestimating me. Sophie followed me to the parking lot, where the cool night air cut through the silence between us. I stopped in front of her car, and for the first time in ages, let out a bitter laugh. She looked at me with curiosity but said nothing, knowing that what I was about to do might not make sense to many, but I didn't care. This night wouldn't end peacefully, not for Mason. It's just beginning, Sophie, I said, looking her in the eyes. This is the last time anyone laughs at my expense. She gave me a knowing smile, the kind only a true friend could offer. She knew that nothing I planned to do was impulsive. Sophie had been by my side, silently watching as I lost pieces of myself for a love that was never real. But tonight was going to be different. What do you need? She asked without hesitation. First, time. Enough for him to think he's gotten away with it. The following week, I cut all contact with Mason and anyone connected to him. I vanished without explanations, without leaving a trace, letting him believe that my departure was an impulsive act, something he could ignore and move past. That was how Mason dealt with everything, ignoring problems until they no longer existed. For a time, that was exactly what he did. I knew he'd move in with Claire as soon as possible. It was predictable. He was a walking cliché who thought he was unique. Tracking his movements was easy thanks to Claire's over-the-top social media posts. Photos of vacations, fancy dinners, and nauseatingly sweet messages. It was like they thought they were living the dream. Meanwhile, I began working on my own plan. I went back to school and built something Mason never believed I could, a small consulting firm dedicated to helping women who had gone through what I had. Success came quickly. Within months, I had a solid network of clients and contacts. Each woman who sought my help became a piece of my puzzle, a part of my revenge. Along the way, I gathered information, nothing too obvious, just little details about Mason and Claire's financial lives, their lifestyle, and most importantly, their debts. Mason had always been terrible with money, and Claire was even worse. It didn't take long to discover that they were living on the edge, barely keeping up appearances with loans and empty promises. Then I made my move. I sent Claire an anonymous message, hinting that Mason had been in touch with me the entire time. Of course, it wasn't true, but Claire was predictable. Within hours, she confronted him, and the arguments escalated quickly. Every word she threw at him was like a dagger, weakening the fragile trust between them. Mason tried calling me multiple times, but I never answered. With each call, I knew he was losing control, something he absolutely hated. His insecurity grew like a poison, while Claire grew more distant, unable to bear the idea that Mason had never truly loved her. The cheerful social media posts dwindled, the vacation stopped, and their fairy tale facade began to crumble. And I had barely started. Next, I went for their most vulnerable point, the house they had bought together. Using the information I'd gathered, I discovered they'd put the house up as collateral for a loan they couldn't pay. With help from my network, I bought the debt in secret. Legally, the house was now mine. The morning Mason and Claire received their eviction notice, I imagined the panic on their faces, Claire, desperate for a solution, and Mason, stubborn and proud, refusing any help. It went exactly as I had planned. Finally, I made my entrance. I waited until they were on the brink of collapse before meeting with Mason. I chose a discreet cafe, and when he arrived, he looked worn out, defeated. For the first time in years, he had lost the arrogance that had always defined him. "Audrey," he began, frustration evident in his voice. "Please, we need to talk. This has gone too far." I gave him a cold, distant smile and looked him straight in the eyes. "No, Mason. It's gone exactly where it needed to." He looked confused, trying to understand how I had turned the tables. It was a look I had waited years to see. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, as if he were the victim here. "Because for years you treated me like a joke," I replied. "Like I was nothing more than a toy for you. Now it's my turn to play." He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand to silence him. "Oh, by the way, Claire already called me. She's ready to leave you." Mason paled. He knew he had lost everything, not just the house but also the one person willing to put up with his lies and manipulations. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. I leaned in, keeping my gaze fixed on him. "I want you to feel exactly what I felt all these years, insignificant and alone." I left him there, sitting in his misery. There was nothing more to say. My revenge was complete, and best of all, I didn't need anything from him, not his validation, not his apologies. I had my freedom, my success, and finally, a peace he could never destroy. As I stepped out of the cafe and felt the fresh air on my face, a genuine smile formed on my lips. Mason was now part of my past, and I was only beginning my future. After that meeting with Mason, something inside me changed forever. It wasn't just a victory over someone who had hurt me, it was something deeper. For the first time in years, I felt light, as if I had finally let go of an anchor pulling me down. The revenge was complete, but most importantly, I was at peace. From that moment on, my life only improved. I poured all the energy I had wasted on Mason into myself and my projects. My consulting firm grew faster than I could have ever imagined. Every woman I helped rebuild her life was like another brick in the foundation of a new, stronger version of myself, free, accomplished, and independent. In less than 2 years, my company became a leader in women's empowerment and support. I was invited to conferences, events, and interviews, and before I knew it, I had become a respected public figure. Life surprised me in ways I never expected. I met new people, friends who cared about me for who I was, not for what they could get from me. And one day, unexpectedly, I met someone special. It wasn't the kind of love that burns and consumes, like I once thought I had with Mason. It was a quiet, secure, and mutual love, something I had never experienced before. Personally, I decided to enjoy the little things in life. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, allowed myself to experience new adventures, and rediscovered who I was without outside pressures. I took courses I never thought I'd take, explored hobbies I'd always wanted to try but had been afraid would make me look silly. Today, my life is a sequence of small joys and great achievements. Mason, on the other hand, lost his way. With Claire out of his life and without the financial support he had always taken for granted, he fell into debt and loneliness. I heard rumors that he tried to reclaim the lifestyle he once flaunted, but no one was willing to help him. The people who surrounded him disappeared, and over time, he became a shadow of the man he thought he was. Sometimes people ask if I feel sorry for him. Honestly, no. I don't wish him harm. My revenge was never about completely destroying him, but about freeing myself. And that's exactly what I did. He no longer occupies space in my mind or my heart. He's a closed chapter, a lesson learned. When I look back, I feel no sadness, no regret. In fact, I feel gratitude for having gone through all of that and, above all, for having had the courage to move on and rewrite my story. Today, my life is exactly as it should be, and most importantly, it's mine.